pictured here were the initial group that were brought together to try to bring into action Camp Koolaree. And in this picture here is Beverley Oatin, who came up from the coast. Reverend Beverley Oatin decided that it should be a camp somewhere in the Kokanee for all the young people that were here. And so he got together with Mrs. Kettlewell of Nelson and Clyde Emery, and they started hunting the property all around the area. And while they were doing this, they got hold of the use of the property at Camp Busk, which is now the government campsite at Kokanee Creek. And they brought these young people there and started to train them for future leaders in whatever camp might be promoted in the years to come, which became Kolaree. And so you see these young people here going through various exercises under the exercise direction of Marge Bingy, who was the sporty director. We were in tents at the mouth of Kokanee Creek and Mosquito Haven, and there's Dr. Brown there and Dr. Hibbert. These men came up from Vancouver and put on courses for these young people so that they would be trained the day that we finally got Camp Koolaree put together. And while this was going on, Reverend Francis Stevens of Trail gathered together Louis Freeman and a few from Rawson, and they went down to the CPR construction camps along the Kokanee Lake and got together lumber and brought it back to Kolaree campsite to form the first cabin floors and a wharf there. The dining hall that you see in use right here is at Camp Busk, and that area is directly behind the information center, which is now the government campsite at Kokanee Creek. And here young people are engaging in something they've never seen before or done before, trying to play water polo. It's not the way you'd see it in Olympic styles, but they got a lot of fun doing it. It's pretty cold water too when you come to think of it. Those people were in there, but they very active, and so the coldness of the water didn't amount to anything. And here we are now at the campsite which became Camp Koolaree, and the original camp there is Reverend Francis Stevens, and there's his brother Doug playing a game of ring toss. And the mounds you see just behind there were root houses for the people that lived on the campsite originally. And there's the boat, the Attagirl, which was on loan to us to take the campers in and out from across the lake. There was a plank walk from the lakeside right up to the railway, where dynamite used to be transported from the storage house either to the lake steamers or up to the railway. And this is a group walking up the boardwalk which led their way to the dining hall. Such people we've seen walking there, Francis Stephen and Dr. Osterhout and Kitty German, and that's the camp cook, Mrs. Stromme, her husband, and the little boy. And now we've got up to the concentrator up on a trip where the campers went up to Kokanee Glacier. And up at the old concentrator there, that was quite a trip by those old vehicles and up the very narrow road. And but however, they went along with it and enjoyed the trip. And we were joined by a group of 15 girl guides from Cranbrook. So we had a party of about 30 on that first trip up there. And that is one of the bunkhouses built up there. And this, while we say Kokanee Glacier, we're in Kokanee Park, and the glacier is over the back of these mountains. There's the tramway going up there, in which they took ore from the mine down and brought mine posts back up. And that is a picture of the Molly Gibson Mine on the way up to the ridge. The Kokanee Glacier they always call it the glacier climb, but actually you're in the alpine area, and it is quite an interesting trip for everybody. This would be taken in 1928 this particular trip. There were 3 trips made by the camp group, one in 1928, one in 1930, and another one in 31. And these are mixed in together, so you're getting a general sight. And this is the group going across the glacier. And this now we're back down at the camp again, and at Kolaree, and the group of campers getting ready to go up to the glacier. And that boat is was the mission boat on the lake, with Reverend George Kinney visited all the campsites, ranchers and so forth, and all the construction sites around Kokanee Lake during that building of the railway up the lake. And that is that's the Attagirl. That boat belonged to the United Church. It was the United Church mission boat. And the dock that they're on is some of the lumber that I mentioned before was brought by raft from the main Kokanee Lake up to the camp. And that's the original wharf we had at the camp. And this morning evolutions and so forth. And this is the girls' camp, the very first girls' camp that was in there, and it was conducted by Miss B. Chisholm, who later became Mrs. McGar, and she was assisted by Margaret Ryan and Bunny Mostrop and Edith Medill. They were leaders that came in from the coast to show us how to run a camp, organize a camp. And these girls had the privilege of being actually the first organized camp in place at Kolaree. They seemed to go in for folk dancing, and that continued on for quite a while. This must have been Sunday because they're all dressed up. That wasn't an everyday dress for the camp. Swimming at Kolaree House became very, very popular. We were always able to have some very proficient swimming instructors at the camp. One notable one was from Cranbrook, Ruth Lundy. She was an excellent swimmer and taught the girls a lot about swimming, life-saving, and so forth. Campsite. When we first got there, everything was, there'd been a house there and that had burned down, and there'd been chicken ranching going on there, and all these things had to be cleaned up, and in the first days of the camp, this is what took place. And these big tents there were left over from the construction down there, and 18 by 24. And there would be probably 20 kids that sleep in one of the tents. There's a little exercise going on with Robbins, the director, taking the beating there. And it's Ralph Stinson in front of him there. And then this was a blanket tossing. That only went on for a short while until they got hold of a wrong blanket, and the ground came awfully close. But that was Ralph Stinson and Bob Beatty, and they vied for the honors of the greatest height. And this was a tower that drifted in there, and so the boys made the most of it. And this was some totem carving that went on. Jimmy Douglas, that shield there, and the other totem that was there, the Indian Club, has been there since the start of the camp. And then they had to decide who was running the camp, and it turns out that first of all it was a group of the ministers in and around Nelson, but eventually it came under the direction of the Religious Education Council of BC, a affiliated with the Religious Education Council of Canada. And this is a trip up to Kokanee Glacier, and this was done by relaying. Take so many up so far and then come back and get some more and go up and eventually get them all up to the... Some of the interesting things about that was, how do you pass on a narrow road up there? And the Beverley Oatin was the guy that could figure it out. You ran the vehicle up on the bank and all got underneath and held it there while the other one went by underneath it, and then you let it back down onto the road again. Must be waiting for that pot of coffee to boil. This is a group waiting, getting ready to go off on a hike. George Kinney and says everyone had to have a stake for an alpine stock, and you sharpened it and burned it to harden the point on it. And as you notice, they're carrying, it was all blankets in those days, so you did them in a roll and put them like a horseshoe around your neck, and away you went up the mountain trail. And this is a building, a bunkhouse that was built there, and Ken Dimmick's father was the carpenter foreman on the building of that. That was the last bunkhouse that Cominco built up in that area to service the Molly Gibson Mine. And you notice how rugged that country is, and yet the Automobile Association decided to show on their maps that you could drive right across the glacier. To their dismay, they found it wasn't possible, as you can see here. Some of these people, there's the two Keir sisters from Trail, Ruth Slater from Trail, Alice Goddard from Trail. Somewhere in there is Herb Swanson, Ted Cornfield. And this is alongside of Kokanee Lake. And the trip, you went along the one side to the far end over to Keene Lake, and then you went up around the back side of the ridge to get up onto the glacier. On one of the trips, we went up twice. We went up the face, up the rock, and the first time we were able to get on the glacier that way. The second time the glacier had receded somewhat and it was too far to get around. So one trip we didn't actually get onto the glacier. But the general way to go to the glacier now is they go to the Joker Mine, which is on the far side, on the north side of the ridge. And they usually go in by helicopter, or we did all hiking. And there's others go in from the Caslow end, and they can drive pretty well up to it at certain times of the year. And going up there, you cut boughs and made your bed with boughs, and then when you left to go up on the glacier, you piled all your belongings in a heap and buried them under the boughs in case the bears came around and decided to take the thing apart. And usually we're divided up into groups of four. There's George Kinney, the director of the party. He was very meticulous and careful in taking people onto the glacier, that they were well prepared and that they knew what they were supposed to do. As I said at the start, this is part of a training program for people to be disciplined. And if they were going to lead other people, they had to be disciplined themselves and know how to discipline the groups that make sure that everybody was going to cooperate. And you weren't allowed to just wander off on your own. The party stayed pretty well together, and for halt was called, like by Robbins there. You stayed for a few minutes or maybe a 10-minute rest or so before you went on again. Somebody making notes or putting a film in his camera. These pictures were taken on a camera that was on loan from the photographer in Trail, and he loaned them to this lady, and she knew nothing about it, but except that to stop our progress up the mountain so the picture could be taken, and we had to wait for her to get away up to the front end again so they could take a picture that was proceeding on up the mountain after we'd gone by. This is the Molly Gibson Mine building. That's looking up towards the ridge. Having a man like George Kinney take in charge in that, there was a lot of things that we would probably have missed, like, well, not, see there, that is Doris Kerman. She was from Grand Forks, characteristic by her eye shade. She was the only one that had one, so that's how I know who it was. But George Kinney could spot marmots or ptarmigans or all sorts of wildlife, but never once did we ever see a bear up there, although they were around. One of the things on a trip like this was you go through the trees and then you get out of the tree line and you go up over the rocks up to the ridge, is to get these people to take note of where they left the tree line, so that when they were returning they'd know where their trail was, where to go back, enter into the trees again. And that group there, we got caught in a sudden blizzard blew across the glacier and it just closed in everything. You just couldn't see rocks, or you just didn't know where you were, and this is where you had to sort of keep them under calm control and calm and collected, as it were, and wait out the storm to blow past. And it's a very, very spectacular thing to see one of those storms go down often as the peaks break through the clouds. It's very, very well rewarding to have a view like that. It's worthwhile the whole trip. See, when you're in this particular area, you're at the top of three valleys. One that goes down into Caslow, and the one that we came up through from Kokanee Lake, and the other one goes down into Slocan Lake, down through to New Denver, down through Lemon Creek. These young people, when they were up there, this is a route they gathered after they'd been, as I said, blanketed in the clouds there for a while, and a little trying on them to keep their cool and so forth, and so they gathered themselves together and had a little service of Thanksgiving that they had survived that ordeal and were now ready to go back. This is one of the fun things on there, but fun has to be done very carefully. You have to examine that slide going down there to make sure there's no shiny spots where ice is sticking through, or you probably would end up without your pants at the bottom. As some of them found out, they wore the hind end out of the pants sliding down those fleeces. There's a ptarmigan. on one occasion, George Kinney was taking a picture, and he spotted a whistler going into a hole. And while he was laying there waiting to take the picture, he said, "Gee, there's the loaf of bread we lost last night." The marmot had taken it and got it in the hole. And that picture there was George Kinney with the scout, and who always went up around and looked the place over before we went out. Now we're back into Kolaree, and this is of 1961, and George Reeves was out there to take pictures, 16mm pictures, a day in the life of Camp Koolaree. And this is the director getting wound up for the day and winding up the rest of the fellas. And this is Ralph Stinson, that's Ralph Stinson, who is teaching the boys signaling. He was in the Navy, and he did some signaling in the Navy, and so he was able to use that, teach the boys that. Softball was always very popular, and this is one of the large camps, and we got the showing the lodge for the first time. The lodge in the background was built in 1934, and it was built to service university student Christian movement camps. People came from all over the world. The director of that camp, or the chief lecturer, was a psychologist from Germany, and there was about 30 or 40 people from different universities right across the country were there at that time. Wherever the director is mentioned, most of these are, the director would be Fred Robbins, because all these pictures actually were taken in with his camera. And this picture was a family camp that was out there. I think it was Mrs. Endicott is one of the ladies I know there, Dr. Endicott's wife, and so Mrs. Benson, B.A. is the oil man, his wife out there in their youngsters. And this is in the girls' camp. This looks like a flag raising ceremony in the girls' camp. The day starts off with assembly and the roll call. Make sure you got all the bodies there after a night, and then they come back for flag raising, and then it's away to breakfast. Exercise first thing in the morning in all the camps. Make sure that everybody's fit and ready to go. It's strange, you very seldom found anybody that was reneging on that. They all got in and had, because it became a fun thing. The water there was quite clear, and at that time, and it's about the depth of the water is about normal for this time, camping time of the year. At the end of June, you might get it going up high water, and it's colder, but it drops back to about the end of July. And this is a group of, in the girls' camp, one of their study groups. Also, the girls during the whole preceding war. And that is Floyd Irwin, who was the business manager of the camp, at the time that we put in the flush toilets. And Floyd has never forgotten the day that he pulled on a chain block to make the pit for those toilets, to get the rocks out of that hole. The cabins that were built, the first 4 cabins, 1, 2, and 3, were built before in 1934. And I think there is probably today only 1 or 2 of the chaps that worked on those cabins still alive, and that's Reverend Bob Morris in Nelson is one of the chaps. Another one that moved in 1938 to South Africa wrote every year to know if his cabin was still operating till he passed away a year ago. And then from then on, the cabins were built partly by the boys in the camp, who would go out in the bush and haul the poles in, and then we'd have help put the floor and that in. Flag raising in the boys' camp. Got tangled up there. It was always very interesting. The boys always wanted to roll the flag and have it unfurled the next morning, and then they'd wait patiently to see whether it was going to unfurl or whether it wasn't. That must have been in a fraternity camp. Oh no, there they are now. Now they're heading for breakfast. One of the chores the boys had to do is Jack Titsworth there peeling right sit there in the corner there. There's Norm McCluskey that came to see how they were getting along. They just split the wood. That was when we had wood burning stoves. Now it's all propane. Now here's the building of a campfire, and I can see by the height of that campfire that probably the time they lit it, they removed about half of it, because there's enough wood there for about 3 nights' fire already in that pile. The interesting thing about that scene is that the growth of the trees between the campfire side and the lake got so thick now that you can't see the lake when you're sitting in the campfire circle. It has to be thinned out. And this is cleaning up around the outside of their cabin. And they put in some extensive decorations, floor decorations that they put in on there. They'll draw maps or pictures of different things that are maybe going to take place during the day, show what the events are going to be. If it's sports, they'll have high jump pit and all that. If it's swimming, they'll have different things to indicate. This picture is in a senior boys camp. I tell by the slowness with which they're moving. Getting old. And this is one of the group study in the camp. Some topics that come before them each day. Topics of boy behavior or group behavior. Archery. Those bows that they have there, some of them were the trail boys made those bows during the winter months. And then this is a totem pole that was designed and by Norman McCluckie, and the help of the boys, they carved it and painted it and erected it to the memory of Beverley Oatin, who was the founder of the camps. And this is a handcraft project going on there, and they're probably making door knockers, and there's some string belts there. I can see some string belts that are being made. As the postman would say when you went around trail, if you came to a house with a woodpecker door knocker on it, you knew the kid had been to Kolaree. And this is on the rifle range. We did teach the use of handling of 22s, single shots, and discipline that was necessary in handling firearms. The system there, they got 13 shots, 3 test shots, and you had to have 3 empty cartridges handed back. So you know there wasn't one being smuggled into their pockets someplace. Another volleyball game. It doesn't take much to get a volleyball game going. They still play quite a bit of it. And there's another interesting picture. Looking across there, you can see the railway track up above there, and now you can't even see that railway track. The brush has grown up so much along the side of it. Later years, you've been having difficulty with the growth in the bottom, and usually about twice during a camp we have to drag the bottom and drag all the weeds out of it. But it's still a lot of good swimming. Of course, the dock has been rebuilt 2 or 3 times. Now that is the Pop Smiley, the launch coming in, and the name Pop Smiley was Robert Smiley, who was the principal of the high school in Nelson, and he came out to help with the senior boys camp, and when the boys were there ahead of him, they said, what are we going to do? When Mr. Smiley comes, we got to go around saying Mr. Smiley, and I said, oh, you fellows will figure that out somehow or other. And so Mr. Smiley arrived in camp, and he was walking through the camp, and all of a sudden it was Sid Horswell, who had been one of his pupils, called out, hey, Pop, come over here and tell us what we should do with this. And from then on, he went back to Nelson, and he became Pop Smiley to all the kids in Nelson. There's the little camp organ, Norman McCluckie sitting at it, going into the chapel. chapel is the heart and soul of the camp. The day starts there. The camp starts there. Camp ends there. And the strange thing was when we had the big visitors' days, how the youngsters would steer their parents right clean past the kitchen and everything to show them the chapel. As you say, the chapel became the heart and soul of the camp. Sunset. That little peak sitting up there is a good guide point.